Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dials, CPA and tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. We also have with us today my business partner, Corby McGordon. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building transferable or sellable business value, and then for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that is transferable and then help you exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. When the right exit strategy for an owner is a sale of their business to a third party, a potential buyer might be a private equity investor. In contrast with venture capital investors, most private equity firms invest in mature companies rather than new ventures or startups, and they manage the portfolio companies to increase or extract value before exiting years downstream. And of course, there are pros and cons in selling to private equity versus a strategic buyer. And we're not going to get into those pros and cons today. We'll do that in another episode. But one thing private equity firms are absolutely known for is how thorough they can be in performing due diligence on a business that they're interested in acquiring. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. What will private equity buyers want to know about your business before they actually write the check? And our guest today is Tim Van Meegem. Tim is a founding partner of the ProAction Group, an operational consulting firm that's been around since 1995, and they help middle market companies identify, quantify, and uncover latent value. Tim's primary focus is serving private equity clients and their portfolio companies, and his expertise in manufacturing, logistics, inventory management are all showcased in his book, Implementing Supply Partnerships, as well as his upcoming book, Shocking Profit. And Tim believes, as we do, that operational excellence is a critical, essential component of unlocking a company's value. And so, Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Pat. Glad to be here. Very glad to be.
It's great to have you here with us. And before we start drilling you with questions, Tim, could you take a couple of minutes and just first describe the work that the ProAction Group, you and the ProAction Group, do for private equity investors?
Sure. Yeah, we work with them in three primary ways. The first one, you directly kind of summarized already, which is we work with them to do an operational diligence. The private equity firms always hire an accountant to look at the books to understand, are earnings what they say they are, or what are their earnings today? They hire us to say, what should earnings be? Or what would earnings be if they incorporated some best practices or things that are maybe a blind spot today, or things that they just weren't aware of or aren't leveraging for whatever reason today. And they also are asking us to look at, let's say, undisclosed risk, maybe an early stage risk. Things that could affect them as they try to scale the company. They want to know up front, they don't want to know to have a reason to not do the deal, but rather, like anything that you think about when risk is involved, if you find out about it early, the solution is usually inexpensive, not invasive, highly effective, and typically it also leads to improvements in employee engagement, in the stress required to run the business, in earnings, in many different aspects that are really meaningful to everyone. The second piece is, we're the type of consultants that we love to do, where we do the studies and we do the analysis and the diligence work so that we know what are the right things, what are the levers that are meaningful and relevant to this company, but where our passion is helping to do it. And I think one of the things I love about our approach is it's a results results-based training approach. We come in, we work with the team to demonstrate a new approach, whether it's logistics or in manufacturing, supply chain, forecasting, front office processes, what have you. And we start by demonstrating. We work with them. We're arm in arm with them, doing it so that by the time we're done, they've got some muscle memory. They've seen it work. It's less theoretical now and more real. And many times, the changes that we're talking about seem counterintuitive. They're different than how we've done business for the last 20, 30, or 40 years. It's scary. And that's just the nature of change. So it's a good approach. And the third piece is there are times where there's a hole in the management team, somebody left or what have you, and we'll come in and take an interim leadership role. And our focus, of course, is operations. So COO, VP of Ops, supply chain, what have you. Mm-hmm. That's ProAction. If I can give a quick metaphor or kind of a story to kind of talk about this, what do private equity firms want to know and where we focused is, remember the old show, the Beverly Hillbillies?
Sure.
Such a great show. So much fun. And Jed's got this farmland in the Ozarks, right? It's probably worth, hundreds or maybe thousands of dollars. And he goes out hunting for food. He misses and accidentally finds out that there's oil, bubbling crude comes up out of the ground. And now all of a sudden, his farmland is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And there's two.
And Jed's moving to Beverly Hills.
He's moving to Beverly Hills, getting a cement pond and everything.
Exactly.
And, yeah. And here's the two big ahas that come to me with that story, with that comparison. The first one is the oil was already there. Jed didn't add it. It was under the ground. He just didn't know it was there. He didn't know the value of it. Found out about it by accident, and then the wheels start moving very quickly. Mm-hmm. It's latent, it's hidden value. And the second is, when that happens, if you were to find oil under a farmland, it'd make the news. It'd be the stuff of legend. It's the stuff your family would be talking about for generations. It's not like that with businesses. Mm-hmm. If I do, 100 diligence projects, one company will go back to the owner, to the board, or to the private equity firm and say, just keep doing what you're doing. We got nothing. The other 99, there's at least one area that may be a blind spot, or for whatever reason, that would make a meaningful difference in the earnings, the performance, the culture or atmosphere of the company that would enhance the value. And so that's kind of the foundation of the story and where our passion is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Tim, let me start us off. Thanks for all that background. It was really useful and interesting. But let me ask you a question. So, I have a lot of misperceptions about things, including private equity firms. So on the one hand, I understand what you're saying about like hidden value, but sometimes hidden value is really just the company doesn't have the capacity to fully exploit its opportunities, right? It's not like there's something they're just missing. It might just be they don't have, we work with a lot of closely held businesses, and kind of a common theme is the founder is great at getting the business to X level. Then he flounders.
Yep.
So I always think, okay, well, PE, you guys have the expertise to come in and take it to that next level. And he may be fully aware of that.
Right.
But then I guess there are also times where maybe there's a segment the business is just missing out on, and you can see that, or maybe like Pat identifies a lot of times, they might just have the wrong person running certain areas, and that's holding them back. So I guess there's, like you're saying, there's a lot of hidden things that could be there, and sometimes it's just they just need help.
You know, there have been times where I brought up examples where, you know, company was able to add tremendous value, you know, in some way by making a change. And oftentimes people will say, gosh, how come they didn't do it before? Was something wrong? You know, and I said, you know, that founder did something that's really tough. They had the sheer willpower to start something out of nothing. Right. And like you said, they've done something that's almost impossible for most of us humans. And that doesn't mean they're going to be good at taking a company they started from nothing. They got it to 30 million, 50 million, 10 million, whatever. But getting it to that next level is a whole different set of skills and approaches. So I completely agree with you. And that is one of the big, you know, tenets or underpinnings of the private equity approach. And your other questions, I would say, absolutely with you. And here's the key. We know there's opportunity to improve, right? The biggest room in the world is room for improvement. What we want to know, though, is what's the return on improving? Mm-hmm. And that's the interesting part of what we do. And something I think, you know, any company that starts to look at and become introspective and look at the opportunities, there are a lot of these things we can find. And you mentioned the word capacity. It's a great topic. To explain or to give an illustration of this. We had a client one time that had a classy problem. They, in 1 year, landed within months of each other, landed Sam's and Costco. Yeah.
Wow. You're either gonna go bust or you're gonna go big, right?
Right. And they didn't have enough time, fortunately, to just build a new plant. Lots of downside of doing that. Not to mention the fact it would take a year or two to do it. So they brought us in to say, can we add enough equipment? They were running their plant 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they were about 40% short of producing the volumes they needed to satisfy the demand from Costco and Sam's Club and their other clients. So they hired us to say, look, can we just fit enough equipment in our current plant to get there? And they hired us to do that analysis. It's a 3-week study. On day 2, we started on a Monday. On Tuesday, we went back to the CEO and said, give us 8 weeks. We'll get you the volume. And 8 weeks later, not only did we get the 40%, but we took them from a 7 to a 5-day work week. Okay. It's dramatic, life-changing impact. And this was, you know, $25 million company. The CapEx required to do all that was $10,000, under $10,000. It was metal to build some tools and, you know, things that would help with you know, speeding up the process. Yeah. Wow. And here's the point that I want to make on this, Walter, is that understanding the capacity, it's this idea of creativity before capital. Understanding what their real capacity is today. They thought their capacity was defined by what they were producing when they needed 40% more. They thought we're at full capacity. But here's the reality. They didn't specifically know what their capacity was. Mm-hmm. They were looking at capacity the way they were running the plant today. Okay. And the people there were amazing, wonderful, thoughtful people that had worked there for 30 years. And they were doing what they were taught when they were brought into the company, and just simply weren't aware of some of the opportunities and approaches. And one of them specifically is to understand your true capacity, which you can calculate. It's like algebra, it's math, not a gut feel. For them, it was, I can't fit another customer in here, so I'm at 100% of capacity. If they would have looked though and said, if I take, this is a manufacturing company, so I take my line speed times 24 hours times 7 days a week, assume 100% first pass quality yield and no downtime. That's, technically that's what capacity is. They didn't know. We did that calculation. We're like, they've got all the capacity they need. We just got to free it up.
Wow. So Tim, we're talking about private equity, and sometimes I think PE seems to get a bad rap. They're going to come in and just cut costs till the cows come home, get what they can out of it, and then move on. But what I hear you saying is they're actually taking latent value that is kind of, it is that Texas crude, right?
Yes, exactly.
Sitting under the surface and uncovering it.
Yes. Yeah. What I love about that, Corby, is we're not a cost-cutting firm. And you're right. That's the first thing people think of when we say, yeah, we do operational consulting. They're like, but here's the reality. Like if we could, people hire us because they want to increase performance. What they remember about the work we do is the impact it has on the people, on the team, on the culture. Because you go from, I heard this story, and it's one that it can choke you up to think about it. But there was a CEO who was a good CEO. He owned a bunch of companies. Decided that they needed to look at lean manufacturing, like the Toyota stuff in their factory in one of their companies. So he brought in a consultant. It's a good consultant. And that consultant selected a group of people, an operator, a maintenance person, a supervisor, someone from accounting, someone from customer service, got them together, and they looked at, a portion of the factory, looked at a line in the factory, and they did their work, and it was dramatic. They got really nice improvements in throughput and quality. And one of the leaders told the CEO about it and said, hey, can they come and present to you, show you what they did? It's like, next week we have a board meeting. Have them come to the board meeting. So they went to the board meeting. The consultant, again, was a good consultant. He didn't present it. The supervisor presented on behalf of the team and presented all the results and how everything worked great. And everybody was applauding and giving them praise. And the CEO sat there quiet. And after it quieted down, he asked the supervisor, what did this mean to you? And the guy's like, what do you mean? It's like, no, to you personally. What was this like? Guy got choked up, and he goes, well, my wife likes me again. And he's like, I didn't expect that. What are you talking about? He goes, before we did this work, every day we'd put out 100 orders. 80 of them would go out perfect. The other 20, there were problems. And everybody's calling me. They're frustrated about this. This is late. Why did this happen? And I'm all day, I'm getting pummeled by all these different like whack-a-mole things going on. And I'm a firefighter all day trying to fix it, get things out the door. By the time I get home, I'm so frazzled that I got no energy and no kindness left for my wife. And he goes, but now, first of all, 90 of those 100 orders go out right. So we cut that in half. And the other 10, there's no blame. We're not frustrated. We actually track it all. We have a team that looks at what happened. Why is this behind? We then put together things to solve the problem. Today, 90 go out right. In 3 months, it'll be 95. And he goes, by the time I'm part of a team that's truly solving problems. I'm not running around putting out fires. Because by the time I get home, I'm excited, I'm happy, and my wife likes talking to me again. Wow. From that day, that's the beauty of this. It's not cost.
So that, of course, all of that is going to increase the value of the business and in the sellability of it. Tim, tell us this. You guys, ProAction recently talked to over 100, you surveyed over 100 PE investors to learn what they really want before they write the check to invest or buy a company. Tell us some of the key things that you learned from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It was an impressive report, and
Thank you.
actually it prompted me to initiate this podcast, this episode. So what did you learn?
Thank you. A couple of things. The biggest one, you can probably tell from our discussion, my passion lies with the value creation. I want to find the oil under the farmland. And that's how we've always talked about our diligence work is, hey, you've got a $7 million EBITDA company, and we come in and show you how to make it 10. And the great thing about operations is it's all under their control. We don't need customer approval. We don't need to get, we get to, these are things that we can go in and direct and make it happen. But what they said was, yeah, we want to know that. But what I really care about is I'm really tired of getting 2 or 3 years into, owning a company. And then we run into these problems that we had no idea that were there. Margin compression is a good example. We bought the company, we're doing a 30% margin, and 2 years later, we're at 28. What happened? Our sales grew. Why are our gross margins going down? Or there's another company that found out 2.5 years into owning the company, they had dramatically increased sales. They were preparing for a sale, and then they had a quarter where the wheels came off the train, and they looked into it, and they found that there was a dramatic lack of control. The reason people did the right thing didn't, they could have padded their pockets 15 different ways. The reason they didn't was because of integrity. Okay. And that was not their problem. It wasn't, but the lack of controls led to a number of different practices that didn't show up until they were 2 years in. And now, like one meeting, they're talking to their investors saying, hey, we're going to sell this next year. And now they go back to and say, it's going to take 3 more years. We need to spend, we got to push that out to the 3rd year because we got to fix these things. And so that's what they came back with is, we want to know what's going to prevent us from scaling the company. And if there's an issue with margin compression, here's another one, unplanned CapEx. Are we going to have to refurbish a machine? Are we going to have to upgrade our computer system? Are we going to have to add another department to address, a new service line or something like that? And then here's one more that's like very, very common is, the owner, the seller often has a meaningful role in the company today. And that person is about to get a life-changing check. And how well is the company prepared to operate without that owner having the same level of intense focus that they have today? And in some cases, it's very easy to understand, like, hey, they've got the customer relationships, and you bring in new salespeople to transfer them to over a 6-month period, but sometimes it's not as obvious, especially when it's in operations. We kind of assume, hey, you know what, we'll just replace him or her, and they'll continue. We're gonna model, improving our margins by 1% for the next 3 years because we're going to be really good at managing this company. And then they find out that that was amazing at something. They knew how to schedule the plant. They knew how to design new products. They knew how to tweak all the machines so they worked. They knew how to work with, like, we have one client that helped pharmaceutical companies navigate the FDA. They may have known the right people. They may have had great relationships to make things happen. When that person fades out, how are we going to handle it? We may have to replace them with 3 people. And even if we do, replicating their skill and experience and mindset may be something very difficult to do. And I don't say this to scare anybody, because this isn't, again, if you catch this, if you have a year to prepare, that seller is going to stick with the company for a year, which is, very common. Consulting agreement or still in the role.
Mhm.
We can prepare for that. We can, prepare how to train people, cross-train people. How do we onboard, do standardized work? And, this is an example too, where addressing the risk is going to lead to dramatic improvements. You never standardize what we're doing today. You look at what we're doing today, you improve the process, and then you standardize it.
Mhm.
And that process often leads to, hey, we can do 20% more with the same people,
Mhm.
the same team, or with the same equipment, the same overhead. And since I'm talking with a whole bunch of accountants, that's where we're not talking about efficiency, we're talking about velocity often. And when we can increase the speed at which we serve customers, whether they're service customers or discrete products, the next sale is at the cost of truly variable costs. If a manufacturing company, the next 20% of our sales is the cost of materials, because we're speeding up the machines, we're getting more utilization out of the machines, and we're improving,
Mhm.
the labor utilization as well. Now it's overhead absorption, it's additional margin. That's how you go from a 17% to a 23% gross margin without working harder. It's
Right.
amazing.
Yeah. That's incredible.
It's a lot of fun.
So
What about a plan for future growth? Do they want to see that? I mean, do they want to see that the current owner or owners have thought through, they've done a good job of planning in the past and then executing on the plan, which instills confidence in whatever plan they have, that they're sliding across the table to private equity at the deal table and saying, look, this is what we think you can do.
Right.
How you can increase not just revenue, but margins and scale and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. How important is that for private equity buyers?
I think there's 2 sides to that coin. And we'll talk first about growth. I think they would be interested in understanding their view of organic growth, especially. Many private equity firms, one of the big value areas that they bring is acquisitive growth, a process to find and acquire other companies to increase, the overall volumes, throughput, approach, capacity, what have you. So I think the private equity firm is bringing growth plans that are probably outstripping anything the seller likely has. And here's why I say that. I don't mean to be too cavalier, but the single most common investment thesis that we see working with private equity firms is we're going to increase the company by 3 times in 3 years.
Mm.
Okay. So they say we're going to have 10% or 15% organic growth each year, and we're going to make, 4 acquisitions. And here's so that's why I say it's a mixed bag on what they're looking for. And I'll say this, in terms of valuation, if you have clarity on opportunities to improve, I'm sure they're going to want to know that, and they'll appreciate knowing that. But they're going to pay based on demonstrated EBITDA. Primarily there are times I think where, you might get additional value because you say, hey, we know that we can increase our capacity, or we can decrease the cost of goods sold, or what have you. But it's not, that you're going to have to be an amazing negotiator to get significant value for that. They're going to base their purchase and what they're willing to pay based on demonstrated EBITDA, as well as, the other things I know you talk about quite a bit, like how dependent is the company on the owner? The more dependent the company is on the owner, the less valuable the company is. Which is counterintuitive, perhaps, at first. So I think that plan, like, and here's, my big message to business owners is, don't wait for the private equity firm to identify that there's oil under your farmland. Figure this out before. If you figure this out 6 months, a year, 2 years before you're thinking about an exit, then you have a real chance to identify it, build support for the concept within your team, implement it, and then be able to demonstrate the improved EBITDA.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I have one more question, flip side to that last question. What, in your experience, for our listeners who are thinking they're going to sell to a third party and they're thinking private equity for all the reasons you might consider private equity, what are reasons that you've seen that private equity would just walk away from a deal?
Yeah. And it's almost always related to a risk. The most common risks that I hear them talking about are, one is customer concentration. That is I'm making this up, but directionally I think it's meaningful. 90% of private equity firms won't look at companies if they have too much customer concentration. Mm-hmm. The other 10% have honed their skill to improve sales and marketing, and they're like, hey, we're all in. It's a value buy. They're gonna discount the multiple that they pay on earnings because of it, but they're ready to address that risk. A second one is project-based revenue. They love,
rather than recurring revenue.
Yes, they love recurring revenue.
Yep.
The risks that we identify, Pat, from the operations side, like margin compression, CapEx requirements, relying on the owner or a few key people for tribal knowledge that's already in their head. It's super rare that anybody has ever stopped or slowed down of a deal because of these types of risks. They're not existential, and they can be addressed. The ones that we already talked about are the big ones that I hear about talking to private equity firms over and over again. The rest of them, I want to know about it early, and even if you think about a late stage risk, something that's already manifesting, like there's lots of one example is a company we went to that had a significant problem with scrap and quality, but they were profitable already. They were okay with scrapping like 8% of their output. Now, that is a risk, right? Poor quality, lots of scrap is a risk. It's late stage, it's manifesting itself. At some level, they're aware of it. They know they're throwing stuff away. I don't think they were acutely aware of it, but they didn't accept it as a risk. They didn't accept that they could do something about it, and that it was a problem worth solving. So there's times where a late stage risk is really, we can address that in 6 months. We're going to take that 8%, scrap rate down to 0.75%. And we're going to add, this much to our earnings. It's like free money to the buyer to address that. It's controllable, and it's going to have a predictable impact on earnings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tim, it's fascinating. What you've honed in on refining excellent processes and excellent understanding. And at times I think owners can think, I got too much to do it right. And so one, are there specific areas that if there are owner listeners out there that they should focus in on? And two, can they DIY it?
Yeah. And do they want to DIY it? Because I think those are two different issues. Having time to focus on improvements and bootstrapping it or doing it all on their own are two different topics. You know, I think of this structure of awareness, acceptance, and action is a great way to think about this. And awareness is first understanding the latent value. Okay. And that can be the first place I would look is what are symptoms that we're experiencing today that we've accepted in some form for a long period of time. Our people are stressed. We have a lot of turnover. We have a quality issue. We're at 90% on time delivery. Our lead times are 30% longer than our competitors. You know, so whatever that area is, to look at that and say, what does it mean to us if we address it? If we figure out a way to address it, is it going to change our world? Or, you know, is it going to allow us to, instead of earning, you know, $1 million a year, we're now earning 1.3 million. And, you know, it's a big win. The first one is to understand the size of the prize. And I think, and in fact, Pat, at the beginning, you mentioned that I've got a book coming out called Shocking Profit. And in it, I do I put a big effort into sharing what do we do? How do we walk through a company and know when they have significant hidden value or a risk that they could address? So they can, you know, I do think there's things that you can do on your own. Start with your big symptoms, you know, bring in, you know, I mean, you can always bring in a consultant like us, but you can also just bring in other business people and say, talk to my people, walk through an order, walk through how we serve this customer, and then tell me what you think. And it's amazing what you learn by just doing that. It's incredible. The acceptance part, what I also see a lot of times, another risk is to go from awareness to action. And I think with business owners, especially the ones who are the founders, they're so used to being the decision maker, to being the will of the company that they're like, okay, we need to do it. All right, we're doing this. Well, as you transition from that entrepreneurial culture and atmosphere to a scalable, process-oriented one, that approach is like trying to go from first base to third base directly.
Right.
You got to touch second base first, or you're going to be out, or you're going to just create a job for yourself. If you are trying to be the problem solver as the CEO, you're creating another job for yourself, and you're missing a great opportunity to teach your people, to give them the authority, to give them the tools, the resources, the bandwidth to identify and accept, all right, you know, this is something we want to do. So spending time up front to say, hey, you know, we've got 8% scrap. Do we really have to live with this?
Right.
Have the team dig in and say, well, what would it, if we got it down to 1%, what would it cost? What would it save? What would the impact be financially? You know, how much of our scrap is actually required? You know, how much of it is really designed in to the system or the process, and how much is because of how we're running it? And as you build that support, you get acceptance where people say, this is a problem we're solving. It's a problem we can solve. And let's go do it, whether we're doing it, bootstrapping it and DIYing it, or bringing in somebody because the payoff is worth, if I can do it in 6 months versus a year, does that make a difference? Then action.
Hey,
It makes
Tim,
sense.
You have something else, Pat?
No, I said, I'm just going to say that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah. This has been really great, Tim, and we thank you for joining us. We got a lot out of it, and I'm sure our listeners did too. So thanks for taking the time.
Such a pleasure.
I can tell that you and your company really know what you're doing, and I'm sure listeners could benefit from hooking up with you in the right situation. So 2 questions on that front. Is there anything you'd like to promote today? And how could our listeners get a hold of you?
Yes, very good. I do. One is specifically, this is a time-based one, but October 26th and 27th, I will be a keynote speaker at the 2023 ASQ Innovate for Excellence Summit in Naperville, Illinois. I'm very excited about that. We already talked about the Shocking Profit book, which should be available by the end of this year. And third, we have a podcast, the Shocking Profit podcast is coming out specifically to talk about exactly what we talked about today, value creation for private business owners. I do this in partnership with a private equity colleague. So he brings investment banking and sponsor experience, and I bring the consulting side, and it's really fun. A lot of great conversations. And in terms of getting a hold of us, I would direct everyone to ProActionGroup.com. It's our website, and my information's up there, the rest of our teams, what we do, who we help, how, and would love to have a conversation with anyone that would be interested.
Great. Thanks very much. And listeners, if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for your eventual exit, you can reach Pat and Corby at 301-859-0860. You can reach me at 301-951-9090. And if you benefited from today's episode, please consider liking and sharing it on social media. Thanks for listening. And until next time on the Exit Readiness podcast, this is Walter Dial, Pat Ennis, and Corby McGordon signing off.